All right, and we're streaming live now.
Hello, welcome everyone. This is the Policy Review Committee. Today is October the 13th, 2020. And to get us started today, we actually are only reviewing two policies tonight. The first one being 522, Title IX Sex Non-Discrimination Policy and grievance procedures. And that's Stacy.
Good evening, everybody. We had talked at our last meeting about the Title IX, and the question came up as to whether this could apply to other areas of harassment under protected classes as well. I did check with our law firm. Title IX is specific under the federal chapter, our federal law. And it is specifically for sexual discrimination, and it has been brought into sexual harassment, which would include a process for our staff. It is pretty rigorous, I would say, and also time consuming, and is fairly specific to just the sexual harassment and discrimination. And I wouldn't recommend, and our attorney wouldn't recommend, that we would move the other policies into this, our harassment policies into this. I did include in our documents just kind of a flow chart. I don't know if you want me to share that, but I can to review it. But it kind of, at a really high level, outlines the process. Within Title IX, you have a coordinator that provides supports, interventions, determines whether a formal complaint is the process to move with this, and then coordinates the process throughout the rest of the system. Then you have to have a different person that conducts the investigation, and yet another person that determines whether there was a violation based upon the investigation, and then yet another person to determine or be available for appeals if somebody doesn't agree with the outcome as determined. And there's very specific reasons in which they may appeal. And all four of these different roles have to be four different unique individuals. So for instance, on the flow chart, it may look like there's a mistake. And you want me to share that with you folks? Okay. And I hope it's showing for you folks. There's a section that talks about whether it's a student or a staff complaint, and you'll notice if it's a student complaint, I'm actually the one conducting the investigation. Because if it is determined that discrimination or harassment did occur, then it would be Brian's position to determine that based upon the investigation. And then he would follow up with corrective actions, measures for that. If it is a staff person doing it, in my role for HR as the HR director, I'd be the one that would want to make the determination and then implement that, but I can't be the investigator. So currently we are using Kennedy and Graven for an external investigation to conduct that. I am trying to work with other principals, also other districts, other HR directors and other districts, to where we flip-flop investigations for one another, because it's, again, we just run out of positions to fulfill all of the roles. So after the determination has been made, either by Brian or myself, depending whether it's staff or students, if an appeal is sought, then it would go to Dr. Battle. If not, we implement the process and the decision, and then we have to file that and add that to our retention policy for record retention. But that kind of gives you an idea of how a claim would flow through the policy. Outside of that, we didn't have any language changes or requests, and if the committee is ready, I think we're ready to move it forward.
So just for clarification though, we saw 522 that had that says, you know, sexual discrimination with strikeouts, which looks like the whole policy was struck out. And then there's 522 Title 1. Is that just like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So Title IX used to be specifically to, and I hope I haven't been saying Title I, Title IX used to be towards discrimination for students. Easiest thing is if the boys baseball team had so much funding that was going towards them, the girls softball team should have the same amount. You know, that's usually, it used to be an athletics or an activity type of comparison. This has really moved it more towards not only discrimination, but actual harassment. And the Department of Education at the federal level has moved it towards not just students for harassment, but also staff. So anything that occurs at a school activity or on school grounds or school-sponsored events, all of that falls under the same umbrella now for Title IX for investigations. So it's moved from away from just discrimination to also cases of harassment. It also has significantly raised the bar in a number of different ways. The information now is shared with both parties through the investigation. It is no longer that we have to be more active in pursuing the investigation, but the bar of demonstrating that a sexual harassment occurred is higher than what it has been in the past.
Darcy, Scott, do you have thoughts, comments, questions?
So just to re-clarify once again, the strike-through policy is we're basically just getting rid of the old policy, and what we're being presented is the almost entirely new policy. That's the difference between the two versions.
That really is the difference, because the direction from the Department of Education has changed so significantly. Our old policy is, quite frankly, out of date.
Right.
It no longer complies with the directives that we've been given.
Okay, I just wanted to re-clarify that. I think we talked about that at the last meeting, but thank you.
Yep.
Great. I don't have any other changes to. I think the only thing that I note is, you know, on the basis of sex, and I don't know if we want to talk about more like gender identity or, you know, just being, but I understand that. I believe what I heard the last time is that this is just the language that is part of Title IX.
Right. This is specifically talking about sexual harassment or discrimination, not gender harassment, not gender issues, not race, not religious. And again, because of the language of the threshold to demonstrate that this form of harassment occurs, wouldn't necessarily apply to other areas, protected areas.
Great, thank you, Stacy. The next policy up for review is policy 602, organization of school calendar and school days, but I think that's just minor changes. Is that true, Brian?
It is, and I can share my screen if you want, but what we are looking at there is, I'm gonna try to share here. All right, can you see 602 at this point? Yeah, it is a minor change, and I'll just explain it briefly. It's just asking or requesting, recommending strike through of the word annually. I think as the board committee generally knows, I try to take a look at this and really run it through practice. And it says there, the school calendar shall be adopted annually by the school board. Since I've been here, at least, the practice has been actually to plan out multiple school years. And so we already have next year's calendar has been approved by the board before I even arrived. And right now, we're preparing 2 calendars for the 2022 through 2024 school years. And so to suggest that the board adopts this annually doesn't, to me, fit what the practice is. And if you look down here in 1A, it does tell you that the calendar has to be recommended for the following school year, no later than each November. So it's already suggesting that absolute minimum chance for adopting a policy for next year is November. But again, our practice is not to revisit this annually. It's actually to plan multiple years in advance. So it's just striking the word annually to reflect current practice is just the recommendation that I would have. And then the other citation appears to just be a statutory request that, or update, I should say, that came directly from MSBA.
Thank you, Brian. Scott, Darcy, do you have any other thoughts or comments on this policy?
I do have a couple questions, actually. 3B lists out some of the dates that are non-classroom days, and we have 7 days over winter break, but not a spring break time. Isn't that built in? Do we have like, is spring break not a built-in break, like winter break?
We do have and have historically had, and certainly as I'm looking at the calendars for the future or subsequent years, we have had a spring break. I would say that's put in and that's probably listed as a preference, but right now that is not dictated by board policy. By board policy, we have to have the 7 days. We do not have to, by board policy, have a spring break. Our past practice is that we have.
Okay, so this is a practice that doesn't follow policy, or a practice that doesn't follow policy then.
I would say that's an accurate statement. There are probably other places where we have days that aren't. I'm just looking at another one, like our calendars have ended on a Thursday with graduation on a Friday.
Right.
But that's not dictated to us in policy, so we don't necessarily write it up that way.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I just wanted to just ask about why spring break wasn't in this list of.
And
3B.
not listing spring break doesn't contradict the policy. It just isn't explicitly stated in the
Sure.
policy.
Yep.
Whereas using the word annually, I think that is contradicted by our actual practices because, like you said, we approve multiple years at a time.
Right, yeah, and we would have had to. Oh yeah, because the rest of the days off are like for like the week. Traditionally for the week of MEA, the first 3 days were conferences, and professional development, things like that. They work for the actual Education Minnesota convention. So that's fine. And so then 3C, is there a process for advisory groups, employee and advisory groups to participate in this process?
Yeah, and so that'll be a part of, because I will have calendar recommendations for 22 through 24 coming forward in November. And as a part of that process, we're developing the drafts right now. I've already visited with Stacy about getting that through. They have a committee of all of our bargaining units that come together to offer feedback. We're going to be bringing it to our cultural liaisons for feedback. And so when I present those calendars to the board for approval, I will talk through the various components like this to ensure that those have been checked off.
Okay, perfect. Under 5A, we note inclement weather as a reason for an e-learning day. But there are other, that's traditionally certainly been the reason to have an e-learning days, but wouldn't also like emergency situations or building issues, things like that would also be reasons to have e-learning days?
So technically, no, because
Okay.
by statute, e-learning is actually only in place for weather impacted learning events. And so
Okay.
they've actually spelled out that technically we could do it, but we could not count that as an e-learning day or as a student contact day. So it might be a way that we do it for not having this discontinuity if a building heating system went down, but technically not covered under e-learning day in statute.
Okay, so then. Okay, so well that makes sense. I mean, that's certainly, and that statute is the one that is which, oh, okay, so that's the 120A.414 is e-learning days, okay. So then all of Roman numeral 5 here talks about e-learning days, and it talks about a plan, an e-learning plan, but we don't talk anywhere here about development of the plan or when that gets developed or what that looks like. Is the e-learning plan is just a statutory requirement?
So the e-learning plan, that would have been the plan we brought to you in the spring of 2019. And that was the presentation by myself and Rachel Gordon to get that approval. So we have that plan in place. Interestingly, last year, we didn't have a time to put it into place. We didn't have enough weather event days. It was one of those years where the year we could have used it was when we developed it, and the year after we didn't. So we have a plan. It is communicated as a part of our fall planning. Certainly this year is out the door because everything got changed with pandemic planning compared to e-learning planning.
Right, yep, absolutely. And so all I'm saying is that this Roman numeral 5 talks about the plan, but nowhere does it talk about when the plan gets developed or how that gets communicated or anything else. It just talks about the implementation of the plan.
True.
So how would
Is the communication in here though? I know that's part of statute. I'm just looking for it. It is
So
required that we,
yeah, so it says that it's it says the communication has to be given to parents and students at the beginning of each school year. The plan has to be communicated, but this, this in of itself doesn't tell anybody how the plan gets developed or what it's I guess how it gets developed or when it gets presented to the board, or does the board have to review it or anything else?
yeah, and I'm not sure, like, is that something that we would want to include in here? In my head, when I was looking through this, it was really the plan has been developed and this was the implementation of it. But I understand your point. I'm just not quite sure where I would insert language or what that might look like.
Yeah, and so, and maybe this isn't the right place for it because this does talk about just the calendar, but somewhere in our policy there, we should talk about what our e-learning plan is, how it gets developed, how does the school board have to approve it, how it gets reviewed, who's reviewing it, that sort of fun technical details. And I don't see it anywhere in any of our cross references or anything like that.
Something to that, no, I don't think that is covered anywhere with specificity. I think there may be some references to it in curriculum, but even that is more generalized. It doesn't have like specifics about this
Right.
plan.
Yeah, and so I don't know, I mean, it sort of seems like this is like e-learning does, if anything, does sort of fall underneath the calendar because what it is largely governed by statute. And so, so it is a calendar, it is a calendar consideration because it is a scheduling and instructional day consideration. And so this may be the best part, but all I'm saying is it's not, we don't see any about where that is.
Yeah, when I read that, my interpretation for its insertion in this location is because of section 4, which talks about school day responsibility, where you've got the minimum number of days, you've got the number of hours requirements. And this speaks to how you get to count days and hours as a part of the requirement. So kind of back up to the 170 that's even in part 3, 170 student contact days. Its insertion here is so that we make sure we realize that this can count towards the 170.
Yep, that's absolutely true. It just, it struck me as I was reading through this that all of a sudden we have a plan. And as you said, and so I don't know where the plan comes from and, that sort of thing. So somewhere should be some information about the learning plan and its creation, who's involved. Does the school board have to approve it like they do the calendar, or is it strictly governed by statute, something like that? So that's the only, so if this is the appropriate place for it, then I have Stacy's helping us out here. And so So if it's simply a matter of cross-referencing that statute with this, but then the additional question is, do you have to bring it to the school board? Do we have to approve it? Is it just governed by statute? Just nothing that bring it to us as a report and not an approval, that sort of thing.
Right, Brian, do you remember if the one you presented last spring was, I mean, I realize a year and a half ago feels like a decade and a half ago, but do you remember, did we approve? I guess I could go back and check the minutes, but was that something that we approved or something you presented to us more for our information?
I'd have to go
The
back and
e-learning
check it out.
plan.
Yep.
I
I'd have to
feel
go
like
back
it's
and
more,
look.
it was I feel it's more of a report, of what we're developing, but I could be entirely mistaken about that. So anyway, so as far as this policy goes, Leslie, I'm fine with what it is and where it stands. And if it's determined that the e-learning plan just needs a cross-reference, in here, that's a pretty minor change to what that is. But do we need something more substantive, either here or somewhere else, that talks about what our e-learning plan process is?
So if I'm hearing a couple of takeaways for me, one is the policy would move forward, but two, I'll do some review as to whether or not it was approved before. And more than anything else, I think what we've learned this year about distant learning is going to revamp our plan. Like the original plan, if we remember, came forward with matrices and student choice boards. I would say our expectations have probably shifted since that time, which means we're probably going to update that plan. I would say probably going into the spring as we get through some things, which means it would be at that point, we would want to know, do we bring that back to board as a report, or do we bring it back as something for approval based on what happened in the spring of 2019?
Right, absolutely. And so this is a good exercise for us to understand where does that process fit into these policies and
Right.
the larger decision-making matrix. So,
Yep.
okay.
I'll
thank
take
you.
that task forward with the secondary part.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We reviewed the policies. So then with the two policies, they would go on the agenda as first read, because the 522 is a complete kind of like redone. So that should go under new business as a first read. With the minor changes, with just the annually and the change in the statute, I'm not sure. How does that work?
That'd be enough for a consent agenda. Yep, with
Consent
those minor
agenda,
changes,
that's what I think.
assuming Brian doesn't bring back anything or substantive for that.
Yeah.
policy.
Great. If we don't have other discussions, I think we're done. No, you got something? Oh.
We have 5, discuss the process for reviewing and changing policies.
Oh, you do?
Was that not on the agenda? Oh, okay.
Have it. Yep, you're good.
Okay.
It is. Okay. I'm sorry. No.
No, that's okay. So policy 208, the development, adoption, and implementation of policies, section 5D says that there will be a review of policies once every 5 years. And then there are specific policies that you have to review annually. But it also calls for the superintendent to develop a system of review. And so right now we are actually reviewing the policies, I believe, every 3 years. So just wanted to know if the committee members had any feedback for me with that piece. Are we looking at just keeping the same system, or, because I really didn't know the historical background of when it went from 5 to 3.
No, first year on the policy committee and the board where it went to the 3 years with the mindset that they are changing often. And so every 3 years seemed like a more appropriate time frame in order to respond to changes in society, culture, education, everything. And so Many policies would not necessarily have any substantive changes and could fly through pretty quickly. And so, but it would give us an opportunity to revisit items on a more accelerated rate than the 5-year plan.
Okay.
And I'd recommend keeping that, 3-year.
Yeah, I think the same way. But, I appreciate the more frequency of looking, because things do change quite a bit, and I think it's behooves us to make sure that we're acknowledging and reviewing with those changes in mind. How about you, Scott?
You?
It's my first year on the committee, so I don't know any different. So I'm fine with whatever the two of you think.
Thank you. That's the feedback I was looking for. It's interesting when you read through the policies what the superintendent is responsible for, and so that one just stuck out to me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that to our attention too, Teresa. So now I think, are we adjourned? Okay, I think we are adjourned now. Thank you, everyone. We will see you in a week.